There have been mass protests in Hong Kong beginning last weekend over the issue of China attempting to extradite individuals from Hong Kong if they've been accused of a crime. Now, this is a big deal because Hong Kong is supposed to have a complete autonomy. However, China has been slowly but surely encroaching, and it has led to incredibly intense protests. More than 1 million people took to the streets. Now today things have kind of died down a little bit because the lawmakers in Hong Kong were supposed to consider this type of law yesterday, but they decided to hold off on it as a result of the protests, which shows you what political activism can really do. Now, after a day of violent clashes between protesters and the police, the president of Hong Kong's legislature on Thursday agreed to delay by at least 2 days consideration of a contentious bill that would allow extraditions to mainland China. Now, at the heart of this issue is a Hong Kong politician by the name of Carrie Lam. She's the individual who's really considering this effort. She's Hong Kong's chief executive who has championed the legislation, compared these protesters to spoiled children, and vowed to keep fighting for the extradition law. Now, why is this a big deal? Remember, Hong Kong is supposed to have complete autonomy, and they have different laws and different rules, meaning that political activism, protest, certain freedoms, religious freedoms are allowed in Hong Kong, but they're not allowed in mainland China. So as China continues to encroach on the liberties and the freedoms of those living in Hong Kong, people are starting to worry with good reason. So that's really what's happening. That's the heart of the story. And there's been intense police brutality in response to these protesters, which I'll show you in just a minute.
Yeah, so I was weirdly encouraged that she called them spoiled children. Why? I'm like, oh, the establishment is the same everywhere. They do terrible things and then go, oh no, you're children for not seeing the wisdom of my corruption and tyranny. Well, you'll excuse us if we don't see that wisdom. And neither do 1 million people in Hong Kong who are protesting. So as usual, the cops roll out the same excuses all over this world. Oh, the cops' lives were in danger. Why? Because of metal bars that the protesters were using. I'm like, so I looked into it. Now, do I know for sure what every single person did there in the protest? No, but the news reports indicate that one of the most dangerous things they had was umbrellas. Maybe that's what he's referring to as a metal bar. Really? You were that scared of umbrellas that you had to use tear gas and rubber bullets?
All of the evidence that I've seen in the form of videos, and I'm about to share some of them with you in just a minute, indicate that the police were incredibly brutal toward the protesters, like to the point where a young woman is on the floor, right? She's being trampled over as protesters run away, and the cops surround her and start beating her. And it's a graphic video. Again, I want to show you this evidence in a minute. But first, I want you to have a little more detail into what's going on and why this is such a big issue among those living in Hong Kong. Take a look.
The basic law says Hong Kong's, quote, way of life is supposed to remain unchanged by the mainland's socialist systems and policies until 2047. But China already has taken steps to erode it. In 2014, Hong Kongers started the so-called umbrella movement in response to an electoral reform plan that would have let citizens vote for the chief executives, but only after China had approved all the candidates. That plan was quashed. But in the years since, China has barred anyone advocating self-determination for the island from running for office. And even after Sunday's mass protest, Carrie Lam, the island's Communist Party-vetted chief executive, vowed to pursue the extradition bill.
There is very little merit to be gained to delay the bill. It will just cause more anxiety and divisiveness in society.
It got delayed though. And I think that this, if the protesters continue to be as responsive as they've been, I think that they could successfully quash this effort as well.
So, look, on the one hand, I'm super encouraged by protests all over the world, and from time to time they work. They've worked several times now in North Africa, and in Hong Kong they've worked in the past, and here they are in the streets again. I'm a little discouraged by how little we do it in America. And you know, we now have a president who brags about being a criminal on national TV, saying he would never work with law enforcement, and nobody's in the streets. And so, look, I don't want you to get into the streets for no reason. First of all, we have ample reason, But that's part of the reason why we started this whole TYT army. Because when you go protest somewhere, I want it to have a point. And so we don't want it just to be a protest. We want to say, hey, politicians, we want you to do this. And in this case, it's the pledge. So tyt.com/pledge to see what that's about for progressive politics. In the case of Hong Kong, I'm again encouraged that they're getting an authoritarian government like China to actually pause some of their policies. Isn't that so sad that they're more responsive to their citizens than we are here in America? I mean, there were massive marches after the Parkland shooting, and 97% of the country wants federal background checks. And our politicians said, in a so-called democracy, don't care. Don't care that those kids got massacred. Don't care that a massacre happens every day in America. Don't care that all these people came out in the streets and protested. I don't care that the whole country wants me to do federal background checks. My donors say no.
Yeah.
So in a sense, we're more corrupt than China.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a great point, because in order for a real response, in order for real change, you need real opposition. And I'm not just talking about the people. Clearly, there are people in America who are deeply opposed to what's going on in the country right now. But at the same time, we talk about this all the time. The Democratic Party as a whole has shown an incredible level of weakness in responding to the brutal behavior by the Trump administration, and in a lot of cases, the criminal behavior by Donald Trump himself. Now, to give you an example of how strong the opposition really is and how responsive they are to the protesters, according to the New York Times, 200 members of the election committee, the body that anoints the territory's chief executive, published an open letter on Wednesday night calling on Carrie Lam to resign.
See, that would never happen here.
It's incredible, and I have so much respect for that type of response to the protesters. But what I don't have respect for is what we're seeing in terms of the police response to the protesters. So I had mentioned that there's a lot of police brutality going on, and I wanted to show you a few examples with the warning that these videos are graphic. But keep our mics up, I wanna comment throughout, and let's show you the first video. So you see them all just run up to a single protester, grab him, throw him to the ground, and just start beating him.
You know what that is? That's sending a message.
Yes.
It's not like they can't tell the 100 cameras around them. They see everybody's recording. They're not doing it despite that. They're doing it because of that. And so they picked. It's almost seeing like animals attack. And
I mean, the guy had his back turned to them. He wasn't, causing any problems. They just ran up to him, surrounded him, threw him to the ground, and started beating him. And a very similar thing happened to a young woman who was also a protester in this next video. Also very graphic, I wanna warn you. But yeah, if you take a look at it, she's on the ground and they just all surround her and they just start beating her like that.
What's the point when she's on the ground? And the cameras are rolling, that's the point. And so they think that they're gonna show people who's boss. So, unfortunately, when you give people weapons and you give them a badge, that also happens throughout the world. And so we have to be extraordinarily careful and train people right, but unfortunately we don't do that either. So, but I'm gonna double down on this. I mean, look, to give you a sense of how bad the Chinese government is not a democracy in any way, shape, or form. It's basically dictatorial, and the Hong Kong's government now has, because of Chinese direction, has disqualified elected lawmakers, banned activists from running for office, prohibited political party, jailed pro-democracy leaders, and looked the other way while Beijing kidnapped people off the streets of Hong Kong. So all those abuses, and yet they are still more responsive to the people than we are in America.
Yeah.
You know what? One last thing about Hong Kong, the protesters are saying this is the end game. If we don't win on this, we're done for. China's just going to have their dictatorial government rule Hong Kong. Man, unfortunately, I totally agree with that analogy. Over there and over here, 2020 is our end game. And that's why I'm fighting so hard for that pledge and for clarity, and make sure that you guys are out there. Come join us in Miami. We're gonna do that rally, tyt.com/rally, June 26th and 27th. I'm not playing, man. If we lose in 2020, we've got 4 or 8 more years of either the status quo of doing absolutely nothing or Trump. I mean, it is an unbelievably bad set of choices. So we have got to fight in the primaries, and we've got to get clarity.